The sun hung low over Alexander's farm, painting the humble buildings with a golden light that belied their dilapidated state. The once thriving property had fallen into disrepair over years of hardship, drought, and mounting debts. Alexander Nowak wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his land, his weathered hands rough from decades of fighting the stubborn soil. At 45, the lines on his face told stories of struggle, but his eyes still held a stubborn flame of hope. He had inherited this farm from his father, who had received it from his father before him. 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice had seeped into this earth, and despite everything, Alexander refused to let it go. The bank's latest notice weighed heavy in his pocket, a constant reminder that time was running out. 2 more weeks, and everything would be lost. Standing beside his lone remaining barn, Alexander turned as he heard the familiar sound of his daughter's footsteps behind him. "Papa, you've been standing here for almost an hour," said Zofia, concern etched on her young face. At 17, she carried herself with the weariness of someone much older, the family's struggles having robbed her of a carefree youth. "You should come inside. I've made dinner." Alexander nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "I'll be there in a moment, my child. I just need to think." After Zofia retreated to the house, Alexander pulled the crumpled notice from his pocket, reading it again as if the words might somehow change. The bank was calling in their loan, and without a miracle, the Nowak family would lose everything. 300,000 zloty. It might as well have been 3 million for all his ability to pay it. A distant rumble broke his reverie. Down the dirt road that connected his farm to the main highway, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of a vehicle. Visitors were rare in this remote corner of the countryside, especially in these hard times. Alexander squinted, making out the sleek black silhouette of a luxury car, so out of place against the rural backdrop that it seemed almost otherworldly. The car stopped at the entrance to his property, and a tall man in an impeccable suit emerged. Even from a distance, everything about him screamed wealth and power. The stranger surveyed the farm with the calculated gaze of someone assessing a potential investment, his sunglasses reflecting the setting sun like twin flames. "Mr. Nowak," the man called out, his voice carrying an unmistakable urban polish. "Alexander Nowak?" Straightening his worn shirt, Alexander approached cautiously. "That's me. How can I help you?" The man extended a manicured hand. "Tomasz Kroll. I was passing through the area and heard about your situation." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained hidden behind his expensive sunglasses. "I represent certain interests that might be able to help you." Alexander's heartbeat quickened. Could this be the miracle he'd been praying for? He knew better than to trust a city man in a suit, but desperation made fools of even the wisest farmers. "Help how, exactly?" Kroll gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more comfortable? It's been a long drive, and I find business is always better with a drink in hand." Inside the modest kitchen, Zofia served them tea, her suspicious glances at the visitor not going unnoticed by her father. Kroll seemed amused by the simple surroundings, his eyes lingering on the cracked plaster walls and worn furniture with poorly disguised disdain. "As I was saying," Kroll continued, setting down his barely touched tea, "I've heard about your financial troubles. The bank is not known for its patience, is it?" He chuckled, as if sharing an inside joke. "I might be interested in purchasing a portion of your land. Not all of it, of course. Just enough to help you clear your debts and get back on your feet." Alexander felt a knot form in his stomach. Selling land was the last thing he wanted to do, but what choice did he have? "Which portion did you have in mind?" Kroll's smile widened. "The section adjacent to the river. I understand it's the most fertile part of your property." Of course it was. The only part of his farm that still yielded a decent harvest. Without it, what remained would be barely worth farming. "And what would you do with it?" Alexander asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Oh, nothing that would disturb you," Kroll replied smoothly. "A small development, vacation homes for people looking to escape the city. very exclusive, very quiet. The thought of his ancestral land being carved up into vacation retreats for the wealthy made Alexander's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "And your offer?" 200,000 zloty. Kroll named the figure casually, as if discussing the weather. It wasn't enough to clear his debt, but it might convince the bank to restructure what remained. It was insulting, predatory, and yet it might be the only lifeline he would get. Alexander felt trapped, cornered like an animal. "I need time to think about it," he said finally. Kroll nodded, unsurprised. "Of course, but don't think too long. The bank won't wait, and neither will I." He placed a business card on the table. "Call me when you decide. But remember, Mr. Nowak, there aren't many buyers for struggling farms these days." After Kroll departed in his gleaming car, the silence in the kitchen hung heavy. Zofia placed a hand on her father's shoulder. "We'll find another way, Papa. We always do." Alexander covered her hand with his own, wishing he shared her confidence. "Go to bed, my child. Tomorrow is another day." But sleep eluded him that night. He tossed and turned, haunted by visions of strangers building luxury homes on the land his grandfather had plowed with nothing but a mule and his bare hands. There had to be another way. Dawn found him sitting at the kitchen table, circles under his eyes, when Zofia came downstairs. "Papa, did you sleep at all?" He shook his head, then suddenly stood up with determination. "I'm going to see old Marek." Zofia's eyes widened. "The horse trader? But why?" "Because he owes me a favor," Alexander replied, already reaching for his coat. "And because I have an idea." Marek Witkowski's trading post stood at the crossroads between three villages, a ramshackle collection of buildings that had seen better days. The old man himself sat on a wooden bench outside, smoking a pipe, his leathery face creased in a permanent squint from decades of haggling in the sun. "Alexander Nowak," he called out as the farmer approached. "It's been a while. What brings you to my humble establishment?" Alexander got straight to the point. "I need a horse, Marek, a good one, strong enough for farm work." Marek raised an eyebrow. "A horse? You haven't had livestock in years, not since your tractor broke down." "Things change," Alexander replied simply. "Do you have one or not?" The old trader puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. "I might. But a good workhorse doesn't come cheap, and everyone knows your situation, my friend." "I don't need your charity, just a fair price," Alexander said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "And I remember when my father helped you rebuild after the fire 20 years ago. You said you'd never forget it." Marek's expression softened at the memory. "That I did, and I'm a man of my word." He stood with a groan, his joints protesting. "Come, let's see what I have in the stables." The stables were mostly empty, a testament to how few farmers could afford horses these days. In the furthest stall, however, stood a magnificent bay stallion, tall and muscular, with intelligent eyes that followed them as they approached. "This is Berza," Marek said, a note of pride in his voice. "Storm, in your language. He's young, strong, and has a good temperament. Worth at least 15,000 zloty." Alexander approached the stall cautiously. The horse was indeed impressive, its coat gleaming with health, but as he drew nearer, he noticed something odd about the way it stood. "What's wrong with his leg?" Marek hesitated. "Ah, you've got a sharp eye. He injured his front left leg a few months ago. The vet says he'll recover fully with proper care, but..." He shrugged. "Buyers want perfect horses, and I haven't found the right person willing to take a chance on him." Alexander moved closer, extending his hand slowly. Berza sniffed his palm, then nudged it gently. Something stirred in Alexander's chest, a connection he hadn't expected. "How much?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the horse. "For you, 8,000. It's still a risk, but if the leg heals as the vet expects, he'll be worth triple that." It was a significant amount, money he didn't really have to spare, but Alexander had made his decision. I'll take him. Back at the farm, Zofia watched with a mixture of disbelief and concern as her father led the limping horse into their old, empty stable. Papa, we can barely feed ourselves. How will we afford a horse? And a sick one at that? He's not sick, just injured, Alexander corrected her, already spreading fresh straw on the floor. And he's our future, Zofia. You'll see. The next morning, as Alexander was feeding Bursa, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching made him step outside. 3 cars had pulled up, and from the first emerged Tomasz Król, now accompanied by several other men in expensive suits. Mr. Nowak, Król called out, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. I was hoping for your call. Instead, I hear you've been spending what little money you have on a crippled horse. He laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. I must say that's not what I expected from a man facing bankruptcy. The other men joined in his laughter, and Alexander felt heat rising to his face. Król approached, peering into the stable at Bursa. My God, it's true. You actually bought this broken-down animal. He turned to his companions. Gentlemen, behold the business acumen of our rural friends. No wonder they're being wiped out. Alexander stood silently, his hands clenched at his sides, as the wealthy men mocked him and his decision. Bursa, sensing the tension, moved protectively closer to his new owner. I've reconsidered your offer, Mr. Król, Alexander said finally, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. And my answer is no. This land is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Król's amusement vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Don't be a fool, Nowak. This horse won't save your farm. Nothing will, except my money. We'll see about that, Alexander replied, meeting the millionaire's gaze without flinching. As Król and his entourage prepared to leave, the businessman turned back with a final warning. You've made a grave mistake today. When the bank takes everything, remember that I offered you a way out. His eyes flickered to Bursa. A lame horse instead of cash in hand. Your family must be so proud. After they departed, Zofia emerged from the house, her face pale. Papa, what have you done? They're right. How can a horse, especially an injured one, possibly save us? Alexander placed an arm around his daughter's shoulders, drawing her close. Because sometimes, Zofia, value isn't always where people think it is. And sometimes, those who mock what they don't understand end up speechless in the end. With that cryptic statement, he returned to tending his new horse, the first step in a plan that would either save everything or lose it all. The days following Król's visit passed in a blur of activity that left Zofia bewildered. Her father, who had seemed defeated just a week ago, now moved with renewed purpose. Each morning he rose before dawn to tend to Bursa, carefully cleaning and bandaging the horse's injured leg, speaking to him in low, soothing tones as if sharing secrets. Alexander spent hours in the stable, emerging with straw in his hair and a determined glint in his eye that Zofia hadn't seen in years. Papa, you can't keep avoiding my questions, she said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. The bank's deadline is in 10 days. How exactly is Bursa going to save our farm? Alexander looked up from the papers scattered before him, calculations and sketches she couldn't decipher. Do you remember my grandfather's stories about this land? Zofia nodded hesitantly. She'd grown up hearing tales of how her great-grandfather had chosen this particular plot when many thought him foolish for it. He didn't buy this land for the surface, Alexander continued, tapping the table for emphasis. He bought it for what lay beneath. Understanding dawned on Zofia's face. The springs. You're talking about the underground springs. Alexander smiled, pleased she'd made the connection. Exactly. 3 natural springs, pure and untouched. In his day they were convenient for farming, nothing more. But now? He slid a newspaper clipping across the table. Water has become precious, especially clean, natural spring water. The article detailed how a mineral water company was searching for new, untapped sources in their region, offering substantial contracts to landowners with pristine springs. Zofia's pulse quickened with hope, then just as quickly faltered. "But Papa, we haven't used those springs in years. The old access wells are collapsed and overgrown. Even if the company was interested, how would we—" Her eyes widened as she finally understood. "The horse. You need Burza to help clear and dig." Alexander nodded. "A tractor would be ideal, but we can't afford to repair ours. Horses, though. They've been helping farmers access water since the beginning of time. Burza is young and strong, and once his leg heals properly, he'll have the power we need." It was a desperate plan, Zofia thought, but perhaps not an impossible one. Still, doubts nagged at her. What if his leg doesn't heal in time? What if the water company isn't interested in our springs? "Then we lose everything," Alexander replied simply. "But we were going to lose everything anyway. At least this way. We fight until the end." The next morning, Alexander was surprised to find Zofia already in the stable when he arrived, brushing Burza's coat with careful strokes. She didn't look at her father as he entered, but said quietly, "Tell me what to do to help." Together, they established a routine. Mornings were dedicated to Burza's recovery, gentle exercises to strengthen his leg, special compresses made from herbs that old Marek had suggested, and increasingly longer walks around the property. The stallion was responding well, his limp gradually becoming less pronounced, his eyes brighter, his powerful body regaining its natural grace. Afternoons were spent locating and assessing the old spring access points. Decades of neglect had left them in poor condition. The main well, closest to the house, was choked with debris and would need the most work. The second, near the eastern boundary, was in slightly better shape, but still unusable. The third, hidden in a copse of trees at the far end of the property, remained completely overgrown, its exact location uncertain. Alexander focused their efforts on the main well. With picks, shovels, and determination, they began clearing away years of accumulated soil and detritus. It was backbreaking work, made more difficult by the summer heat that beat down mercilessly. By the end of each day, both father and daughter were exhausted, their clothes soaked with sweat, their hands blistered and raw. Word of their endeavor spread quickly through the neighboring farms. Most considered it a fool's errand, a desperate man's last grasp at salvation. But a few, those who remembered how Alexander's grandfather had prospered when others failed, watched with curious eyes. Old stories resurfaced about the exceptional purity of the Nowak springs, how livestock that drank from them seemed healthier, how crops irrigated with their water grew more abundant. On the 5th day of their labors, as the sun climbed high overhead, Zofia paused to wipe her brow. "Papa, someone's coming," she said, pointing toward the road. A dust cloud announced the arrival of a battered pickup truck that rattled to a stop beside their house. To Alexander's surprise, out stepped Piotr Wojcik, a neighboring farmer he knew only in passing. The man approached cautiously, hat in hand. "Nowak," he greeted with a nod. "I hear you're trying to uncover the old springs." Alexander straightened, wincing as his tired muscles protested. "That's right." Piotr shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. "My father used to speak of your grandfather's water, said it was the best in the county." He paused, then added abruptly, "I've brought my sons. We'd like to help, if you'll have us." Before Alexander could respond, 2 young men climbed out of the truck, already rolling up their sleeves. Piotr looked embarrassed by his own gesture of goodwill. "We've all had our struggles with the banks. Sometimes a man needs neighbors, that's all." Overcome with gratitude, Alexander could only nod his thanks. With the additional hands, work progressed much faster. By sunset, they had cleared enough of the main well to confirm that water still flowed beneath, pure and clear as legend claimed. As Piotr and his sons prepared to leave, promising to return the next day, Alexander asked what had spurred their decision to help. Piotr's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Truth be told, it was the horse that convinced me. Any man who'd spend his last coins on a lame animal nurse it back to health, and put it to good use instead of selling out to city folk like Kroll. Well, that's a man worth helping." He spat on the ground at the mention of the millionaire's name. "We all know what Kroll really wants this land for, and it's not vacation homes." After they departed, Zofia turned to her father with questioning eyes. What did he mean about Kroll? Alexander sighed heavily. "There are rumors. Nothing concrete, but people say Kroll has been buying up land all over the region. Some believe he's discovered something valuable underground and is acquiring properties at a fraction of their worth." "You think he knows about our springs?" Zofia asked, alarmed. "Perhaps, or perhaps something else. Either way, it explains his interest and his anger when I refused his offer." That night, Alexander lay awake, calculating time against progress. They had made headway, but the bank's deadline loomed ever closer. Even with help, would they be ready in time to approach the water company? And would Burza's leg be strong enough when they needed him most? As if in answer to his unspoken worries, a loud commotion from the stable jolted him upright. He rushed outside in his nightclothes, fearing the worst. Had Kroll sent men to sabotage their efforts? Had Burza injured himself further? He found the horse in distress, whinnying loudly, kicking at his stall door. Alexander approached cautiously, speaking calming words, but Burza only grew more agitated. The stallion kept turning toward the back wall of the stable, then looking back at Alexander as if trying to communicate something urgent. "What is it, boy?" Alexander murmured, attempting to soothe the animal. "What's frightened you?" A faint sound caught his attention, a steady dripping from the rear of the stable where the building backed up against a small rise in the land. Following Burza's gaze, Alexander noticed water seeping through a crack in the old stone wall, forming a small puddle on the floor. Heart pounding, he fetched a lantern and examined the wall more closely. The mortar between the stones was damp and crumbling, and water continued to seep through at a steady rate. With growing excitement, he tasted it, clean, cold, with a mineral tang that was unmistakable. Somehow, water from one of the springs had found a new path to the surface, directly into their stable. Zofia appeared in the doorway, having been awakened by the noise. "Papa? What's happening?" Alexander turned to her, his face illuminated by the lantern's glow, his eyes alight with wonder. "It's a sign, Zofia. The springs are stronger than we thought. They're pushing upward, trying to break free." He patted Burza's neck gratefully. "And our clever horse knew it before any of us." As if understanding the praise, Burza calmed immediately, nuzzling Alexander's shoulder. The horse's leg, Alexander noticed with satisfaction, barely trembled under his weight now. Their gamble on his recovery was paying off faster than expected. Dawn found them excavating behind the stable, following the water's trail. By midday, they had uncovered what appeared to be a previously unknown spring outlet, one not documented in any of the old family records. This discovery changed everything. It was closer to the road, more accessible, and from their initial tests, even purer than the main spring they had been working to clear. Piotr and his sons arrived as promised and were astonished by what they found. "This is remarkable, Nowak," Piotr exclaimed, examining the clear water bubbling up from the earth. "With this, you might not just save your farm, you could prosper again." Alexander nodded, a mixture of hope and caution tempering his excitement. "If we can secure a contract with the water company in time." "Leave that to me," Piotr said unexpectedly. "My cousin works for them. I'll have him here tomorrow to see this for himself." As they continued working, Alexander noticed more neighbors arriving, curious about the commotion. Word of the spring's discovery had spread quickly. Some came merely to witness. Others rolled up their sleeves and pitched in without being asked. By evening, what had begun as a solitary battle had transformed into a community effort. Standing back to observe the progress, Alexander felt Zofia slip her hand into his. "You were right, Papa," she said softly. "About Burza. About everything." He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze drifting to where the horse stood watching the activity, his powerful presence a reminder of how this all began. "We're not saved yet," he cautioned. But for the first time, I believe we have a real chance." True to his word, Piotr arrived the next morning with a man who introduced himself as Jakub Wilk, a field representative for Krynica Waters. Dressed in a casual button-down shirt and khaki pants, Jakub had none of the predatory smoothness of Kroll, but rather the practical demeanor of someone who understood both business and the land. He carried a leather satchel containing various testing equipment and sample bottles. "I can't make any promises," Jakub warned, as Alexander led him to the newly discovered spring outlet. "The company has strict standards for purity, mineral content, and flow rate. Many sources that seem promising ultimately don't qualify." Alexander nodded, trying to temper his hopes. "I understand. We only ask for a fair assessment." Upon seeing the spring, however, Jakub's professional reserve gave way to visible interest. He knelt beside the flowing water, examining its clarity, then opened his satchel and began conducting preliminary tests. Alexander, Zofia, and Piotr watched anxiously as he collected samples, measured the flow, and made careful notes in a small notebook. "Well?" Alexander asked when Jakub finally stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Initial signs are quite promising," the representative admitted. "The clarity is exceptional, and the mineral balance seems ideal based on my field tests. But the company will need to run comprehensive analysis at our laboratory." He gestured to the samples he'd collected. "I'll expedite these today. We should have preliminary results in 3 days." 3 days. Alexander did the mental calculation. That would leave them just 4 days before the bank's deadline, cutting it dangerously close. "How long after that until we might know about a potential contract?" Jakub hesitated. "Normally the process takes weeks. There are negotiations, legal reviews." He must have seen the hope drain from Alexander's face because he added quickly, "But given your circumstances, which Piotr has explained, I'll speak directly to my superiors. If the lab results are as promising as I suspect, we might be able to offer at least a letter of intent before your deadline." As Jakub prepared to leave, he paused, looking back at the spring. "May I ask why you haven't approached us before now? Springs of this quality are rare." "They were forgotten," Alexander replied simply. "Sometimes we overlook the treasures beneath our feet until necessity forces us to look deeper." After Jakub's departure, the work continued with renewed vigor. The community's involvement had grown. What started with Piotr and his sons had expanded to include several neighboring families. Some brought food for the workers, others lent equipment or offered their labor. An elderly woman who lived alone on the next property arrived with stacks of old newspapers documenting the region's history, including mentions of the famous Noack Springs from decades past. "My husband kept these," she explained, handing the yellowed pages to Zofia. "He always said your grandfather was the smartest man in the county for buying land with 3 natural springs. Back then, people thought he was crazy to pay extra for wet ground that might flood. Shows what they knew." Zofia spent the evening poring over the articles, finding references to the exceptional purity of their water and how local doctors had once recommended it for various ailments. This historical evidence could strengthen their case with the water company, providing a documented legacy of quality. Meanwhile, Alexander focused on preparing Burza for the work ahead. If they secured a contract, they would need to clear and develop all 3 spring sites, not just the newly discovered one. That meant moving earth and stones, tasks that would require the horse's strength. Though Burza's recovery had progressed remarkably well, Alexander was careful not to push him too hard too soon. On the morning of the 3rd day after Jakub's visit, as Alexander was working with Burza in the paddock they'd constructed, the sound of approaching vehicles made him look up. His heart sank when he recognized Kroll's sleek black car leading a small convoy. But instead of stopping at the farm, the vehicles continued down the road toward the village. Through the car's open window, Alexander caught a glimpse of Kroll's face, tight with suppressed anger, as he deliberately avoided looking at the Noack property. "What do you think that's about?" Zofia asked, joining her father at the fence. "Nothing good," Alexander replied grimly. "Kroll doesn't strike me as the type to accept rejection gracefully. He's planning something. They didn't have to wonder long. That afternoon, Piotr arrived in his pickup, his expression troubled. Kroll called a meeting at the village hall, he reported. He's offering to buy land from anyone willing to sell, at prices well above market value. Alexander frowned. Why would he suddenly offer more than fair value when he tried to lowball me? Because he knows what you've discovered, Piotr said. Or at least, he suspects. Word of the spring and the water company's interest has spread. Kroll now realizes he needs to secure as much surrounding land as possible. Did many agree to sell? Zofia asked anxiously. Piotr shook his head. Not yet, but he's putting pressure on those with debts, offering to clear them completely in exchange for their land. And he's spreading rumors too, saying your springs are contaminated, that Krynica will never offer you a contract, that you'll drag down property values when you inevitably go bankrupt. Alexander clenched his jaw but remained outwardly calm. We expected resistance. All we can do is continue our work and hope Jakub returns with good news. The next day brought no word from the water company, but it did bring more neighbors curious about the springs. Some came to help, others to verify the rumors for themselves. Alexander welcomed them all, showing them the clear, bubbling water and explaining their plans. By now, the main spring had been fully cleared and properly channeled, creating an impressive sight that was difficult to dismiss as worthless or contaminated. As the sun began to set on the fourth day since Jakub's visit, Alexander sat alone by the spring, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. Tomorrow was the fifth day, the day they had expected to hear results from the laboratory tests. But with no word yet, doubt began to creep in. Had something gone wrong? Had Kroll somehow interfered? The sound of hooves made him turn. Berza had escaped from his paddock again, a habit he'd developed recently, and had come to stand beside Alexander. The stallion nudged his shoulder gently, as if offering comfort. Despite his worries, Alexander smiled, stroking the horse's muscular neck. You know, Berza, when I bought you, everyone thought I'd lost my mind, he said softly. A struggling farmer spending his last money on an injured horse. But look at you now. Indeed, Berza stood tall and proud, his injured leg now bearing weight confidently, his coat gleaming with health. Sometimes the best investments are the ones others mock. The horse nickered softly in response, ears perked forward. Suddenly he raised his head, attention fixed on something in the distance. Moments later, Alexander heard what had alerted Berza, the sound of an approaching vehicle. Jakub's company car pulled up beside the house, and the representative stepped out, his expression unreadable. Alexander's heart raced as he walked to meet him, Berza following a few paces behind. Mr. Nowak, Jakub greeted him formally. I apologize for the delay. There were complications. Alexander's hope faltered. Complications. Jakub glanced around, noticing several neighbors still working nearby. Perhaps we could speak privately. Inside the kitchen, with Zofia joining them, Jakub placed a thick folder on the table. First, the laboratory results, he began, opening the folder to reveal pages of technical data. Your water is exceptional, among the purest natural sources we've tested in years. The mineral profile is perfectly balanced for bottling, and the flow rate is sustainable for commercial use. Relief washed over Alexander. Then the company is interested? Very interested, Jakub confirmed. However, this is where things become complicated. He pulled out another document. Yesterday, we received a letter from a lawyer representing Tomasz Kroll. He claims that the water rights to this entire region belong to a holding company he controls, based on some obscure property transaction from the 1970s. That's absurd, Alexander protested. This land has been in my family for generations. We've always owned the water rights. I believe you, Jakub assured him. And my company's legal team is skeptical of Kroll's claims as well. But legal challenges, even frivolous ones, can tie up negotiations for months. Zofia paled. We don't have months. The bank? Yes. Piotr explained your situation, Jakub interrupted gently. which is why I pushed my superiors for an immediate decision. He pulled a final document from his folder, sliding it across the table. This is a letter of intent from Krynica Waters, offering to enter into a 10-year exclusive contract for rights to bottle water from the Nowak Springs, with an immediate advance payment of 400,000 zloty upon signing. Alexander stared at the document, barely able to believe what he was hearing. 400,000, more than enough to clear their debt and finance proper development of all three springs. There's a condition, Jakub continued. We need proof that you, not Kroll, control the water rights. Our legal team suggests securing a statement from the Regional Land Registry Office confirming your ownership. Can you do that before your bank deadline? Alexander exchanged glances with Zofia. The registry office was in the city, a 3-hour drive away. Yes, he said firmly. We'll get it first thing tomorrow. After Jakub left, Zofia threw her arms around her father, tears of joy streaming down her face. We did it, Papa. We actually did it. Alexander hugged her tightly, but his expression remained cautious. Not yet, my child. Kroll won't give up so easily. Tomorrow will be the most important day of all. Outside, as twilight deepened into night, Burza stood watching from his paddock, a silent guardian as the Nowak farm teetered between salvation and ruin. Dawn had barely broken when Alexander and Zofia prepared to leave for the city. Their ancient truck, which had been sitting idle for months due to lack of fuel, sputtered reluctantly to life after Piotr helped them siphon some diesel from his own vehicle. The journey would take 3 hours each way, leaving them precious little time to navigate the bureaucracy of the registry office before it closed. I'll watch over things here, Piotr promised as they climbed into the truck, and I'll keep an eye on Burza. The horse had become something of a local celebrity, with neighbors stopping by specifically to check on his progress. Alexander nodded gratefully. If anyone from Kroll's camp shows up, we'll handle it, Piotr assured him, his weathered face set with determination. Just get those documents. The truck rattled down the dusty road, belching occasional clouds of black smoke. Zofia clutched a folder containing all their property records, her knuckles white with tension. Do you think Kroll knows what we're doing today? She asked, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. Almost certainly, Alexander replied grimly, which is why we need to be prepared for anything. The countryside gradually gave way to small towns, then suburbs, and finally the sprawling outskirts of the city. It had been years since either of them had ventured this far from home, and the contrast between their simple rural life and the bustling urban center was jarring. Towering glass buildings reflected the morning sun, streams of well-dressed people hurried along crowded sidewalks, and the air filled with the cacophony of traffic and construction. Alexander navigated the unfamiliar streets with growing anxiety, aware that every minute lost could be decisive. When they finally located the Regional Land Registry building, an imposing structure of gray stone with official flags flanking its entrance, it was already mid-morning. Inside, they joined a long queue of people waiting for assistance. The air was stifling, heavy with the scent of paper and frustrated humanity. Bureaucrats moved at an agonizingly slow pace behind glass partitions, stamping documents and typing information into computers with methodical indifference. We'll never get through in time, Zofia whispered, eyeing the clock on the wall. Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly, though he shared her concern. Patience, my child. We've come too far to give up now. After nearly an hour of waiting, they finally reached the front of the line. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with spectacles perched on her nose, regarded them with weary disinterest. Yes? Alexander explained their situation, trying to convey urgency without sounding desperate. The clerk's expression remained impassive as she examined their documents. You need a certified extract from the property registry confirming water rights ownership, she stated flatly. That requires Form WR7, submitted with the original deed and proof of continuous ownership. Processing time is normally 10 working days. 10 days, Zofia exclaimed, unable to hide her dismay. But we need it today. Our bank deadline. I'm afraid personal circumstances don't alter administrative procedures, the clerk interrupted, already looking past them to the next person in line. Alexander leaned forward, lowering his voice. Please. Our entire future depends on this document. Isn't there any way to expedite the process? An emergency procedure, perhaps? The clerk hesitated, then sighed. There is an accelerated service for urgent cases, but it requires additional documentation and an expediting fee of 300 zloty. It was a significant sum, money they could ill afford to spare. But compared to what was at stake, there was no real choice. Alexander nodded, reaching for his worn wallet. After paying the fee and completing the additional paperwork, they were directed to another floor, where they would need to wait for a senior registrar to review and approve their application. The elevator was out of order, so they climbed 5 flights of stairs, Alexander's knees protesting with each step. The senior registrar's waiting area was mercifully less crowded, but the clock continued its relentless march toward afternoon. Zofia paced nervously while Alexander sat with closed eyes, mentally calculating how much time remained for the return journey. "Nowak," a voice finally called. They were led into an office where a stern-looking man with graying hair sat behind a desk piled high with folders. The registrar studied their application with meticulous slowness, occasionally referencing other documents or tapping at his computer. "This property," he said at last, "has some rather unusual notations." Alexander tensed. What kind of notations? "There appears to be a pending claim on the subsurface rights, filed just yesterday." The registrar adjusted his glasses. "By a corporation called Krollvest Holdings." Zofia gasped softly. Kroll had anticipated their move and acted preemptively. "That's impossible," Alexander stated firmly. "Our family has owned those rights for 3 generations. We have the original deed right here." He tapped the folder Zofia held. The registrar accepted the deed, examining it carefully. "Indeed, this document does clearly specify inclusion of all mineral and water rights in perpetuity." He frowned, turning back to his computer. The claim filed by Krollvest cites a separate transaction in 1978, allegedly transferring subsurface rights while leaving surface ownership intact. "No such transaction ever occurred," Alexander insisted. "My father would never have sold those rights. He understood their value better than anyone." The registrar typed something into his computer, then nodded slowly. "You appear to be correct, Mr. Nowak. The claim references documentation that isn't actually present in our records. It's merely an assertion without substantiating evidence." He looked up, his expression softening slightly. "This seems to be an attempt to create confusion in the registry. A delaying tactic, perhaps." Relief washed over Alexander. "Then you can issue the certificate confirming our ownership." "I can," the registrar confirmed, reaching for an official form. "Though I should warn you, this likely won't be the end of the matter. Parties with sufficient resources can create legal obstacles even without legitimate claims." As the registrar prepared their certificate, Alexander's phone rang, a rare occurrence that immediately set him on edge. It was Piotr, his voice crackling with poor reception. "Alexander, you need to hurry back," he said without preamble. "Kroll's men are here with some official from the bank. They're saying the loan deadline has been moved up to today due to some clause in the fine print. They're threatening to start repossession procedures immediately." "That's not possible," Alexander protested, though a cold weight settled in his stomach. "The agreement clearly stated, 'I know, but they have paperwork with your signature. Something about an acceleration clause if the property's status changes. They're claiming your work on the springs constitutes unauthorized development.'" Anger and fear battled within Alexander. "Stall them, Piotr. We're getting the certificate now. We'll be back as soon as we can." The registrar, who had overheard the conversation, expedited the final steps. Within minutes, Alexander and Zofia were hurrying back to their truck, the precious certificate secured in a sealed official envelope. The return journey was a nightmare of tension. Every red light, every slow-moving vehicle ahead of them felt like a deliberate obstacle. Zofia kept trying to call Piotr for updates, but cell reception in the rural areas was spotty at best. "What if they've already started the repossession?" she asked, voicing the fear that gripped them both. They can't legally remove us without a court order, Alexander replied, though uncertainty tinged his voice. And even then, there's a process. It takes time. But if they damage the springs or contaminate them somehow… Zofia couldn't finish the thought. Alexander pressed harder on the accelerator, the old truck protesting with alarming sounds from its engine. They were still an hour from home when a plume of black smoke erupted from under the hood. The vehicle shuddered, coughed, and died, coasting to a stop on the shoulder of the road. No, 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 Alexander muttered, frantically turning the key. Nothing happened. Not even the click of a failing starter. The truck was completely dead. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service, and the crucial document still hours away from where it needed to be. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, a mocking reminder of time slipping away. Zofia fought back tears of frustration. What do we do now? Alexander stepped out of the truck, scanning the empty road in both directions. Not a single vehicle in sight. They might wait hours for someone to pass by. Hours they didn't have. He made a sudden decision. We walk. Walk? But it's at least 20 kilometers. Then we better start now. Alexander grabbed the envelope with the certificate and began striding purposefully down the road. After a moment's hesitation, Zofia hurried to catch up. They had covered perhaps 2 kilometers when the distant sound of an engine caught their attention. A vehicle was approaching from behind them. Alexander turned, hope rising, then immediately falling as he recognized the sleek black car. Kroll's car slowed as it neared them, its tinted window sliding down to reveal the millionaire's smugly triumphant face. "Car trouble, Nowak?" he called out. "What terrible luck on such an important day." Alexander stood his ground, one hand protectively gripping the envelope, the other reaching for Zofia. "This isn't over, Kroll." "I think you'll find it is," Kroll replied with mock sympathy. "My associates at the bank should be completing the paperwork right about now. But don't worry, I'm a reasonable man. I'll let you collect your personal belongings before vacating the property." His gaze shifted to the envelope in Alexander's hand. "Though I'm afraid that document you've gone to such trouble to obtain will be quite useless." With a final contemptuous smile, Kroll raised his window, and the car accelerated away, leaving Alexander and Zofia in a cloud of dust. "He planned this," Zofia whispered, watching the car disappear around a bend. The truck breaking down. "It wasn't an accident." Alexander nodded grimly. "Likely someone tampered with it while we were in the registry office." He looked down the empty road stretching before them, determination hardening his features. "But Kroll has forgotten something important." "What's that?" "A farmer never gives up." Alexander tucked the envelope securely inside his jacket and continued walking, his pace even more resolute than before. "And neither does his daughter. Come, Zofia, our home is waiting." The sun dipped lower on the horizon as Alexander and Zofia continued their determined march homeward. Their shadows stretched long across the asphalt, 2 solitary figures against the vast countryside. Despite the growing ache in his legs and the burning in his lungs, Alexander maintained a steady pace. Beside him, Zofia matched his stride, her young face set with the same stubborn resolve that characterized her father. They had been walking for nearly 2 hours when the sound of an approaching vehicle made them turn. This time, it wasn't Kroll's sleek car, but a battered farm truck much like their own, driven by an elderly man they didn't recognize. The truck slowed as it drew alongside them. "You folks need a lift?" the driver called out, leaning across the passenger seat to address them through the open window. Alexander hesitated only briefly before nodding. "If you're heading toward Wilcha Dolina, we'd be grateful." "Hop in," the man replied, gesturing to the back of the pickup. "I'm going right through there." As they climbed into the truck bed, Alexander felt a surge of cautious hope. Perhaps they might still reach home in time. The pickup accelerated, eating up the kilometers much faster than their tired feet could manage. Wind whipped at their hair and clothing, but neither complained. Each minute brought them closer to their destination, closer to confronting whatever Kroll had set in motion. Do you think Piotr and the others will be able to hold them off? Zofia asked, raising her voice above the rush of air. If anyone can, it's Piotr, Alexander replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Kroll had money, influence, and apparently the bank on his side. What did they have but the loyalty of a few neighbors and a certified document that might already be too late to use? They had one more asset, he reminded himself. One that Kroll had mocked openly, dismissing its value without understanding. Burza. The horse had already proven his worth beyond all expectations, leading them to discover the hidden spring. Perhaps he still had a role to play in this unfolding drama. The truck turned onto the familiar road leading to their village. In the distance, they could make out a cluster of vehicles parked near the entrance to their property. Alexander's heart sank as he recognized Kroll's car among them, along with what appeared to be official vehicles, the bank representative, perhaps even law enforcement. "Stop here, please," Alexander called to the driver when they were still half a kilometer away. Better to approach carefully, assess the situation before being seen. The driver pulled over, eyeing the gathered vehicles with curiosity. "Trouble at your place?" "A disagreement about ownership," Alexander replied diplomatically. "Thank you for the ride." As the truck drove away, Alexander and Zofia ducked into a stand of trees that ran parallel to their property line. Moving quietly through the underbrush, they approached close enough to observe without being detected. The scene before them confirmed their worst fears. A small crowd had gathered in their yard. Kroll and two of his associates, a man in a banker's suit clutching a portfolio, and two uniformed police officers. Facing them stood Piotr and several neighbors, forming a human barrier between the officials and the farmhouse. Tension was evident in their rigid postures and the raised voices that carried across the field. "They have no right," they heard Piotr shout. "The deadline isn't until tomorrow. This is illegal entry." The terms were clearly stated in the loan modification agreement. The banker replied smoothly, extracting a document from his portfolio. Section 12, Paragraph B. In the event the borrower engages in development activities that materially alter the property's character or value without prior written consent, the lender reserves the right to accelerate the payment schedule at their discretion. Kroll stepped forward, his expensive shoes incongruous against the dusty farmyard. And as you can see, substantial unauthorized development has occurred. These improvised wells, the excavation, all without permits or bank approval. One of the police officers shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Nowak should at least be present for this proceeding. Perhaps we should return tomorrow." "The bank's rights are clear," Kroll interrupted sharply. "Mr. Nowak was notified of the acceleration clause this morning. His absence now doesn't invalidate the procedure." From their hiding place, Zofia clutched her father's arm. "They're twisting everything," she whispered furiously. "We weren't developing. We were restoring what was already there." Alexander nodded grimly. Kroll knew exactly what he was doing, sending us to the city today. He never expected us to make it back in time. They watched as the banker handed documents to the police officers, who studied them with evident reluctance. Legally, the bank's position appeared unassailable. Without the water company's letter of intent and the registry certificate to prove their ownership of the water rights, they had no counter-argument strong enough to halt the proceedings. "We need to get to Jakub," Alexander murmured. "If we can bring him here with the contract ready to sign, we might still—" His words cut off abruptly as a commotion erupted near the stable. A powerful neigh split the air, followed by the sound of splintering wood. All heads turned to see Burza burst through the paddock gate, his powerful form silhouetted against the setting sun. The stallion reared dramatically, front hooves pawing the air, then charged directly toward the gathered officials. Kroll backpedaled rapidly, nearly falling in his haste to escape the approaching horse. The banker dropped his portfolio, papers scattering in the wind. Even the police officers retreated, hands instinctively moving to their sidearms before recognizing that the animal, while intimidating, wasn't actually attacking anyone. Burza circled the group, effectively separating them from the farmhouse. His once injured leg showed no signs of weakness as he moved with powerful grace, snorting and tossing his head. It was as if he understood exactly what was happening and had decided to intervene in the only way he could. "Control that beast," Kroll shouted at Piotr, who made no move to restrain the horse. "Not my horse," Piotr replied with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Can't help you there." The distraction provided the opportunity Alexander needed. "Stay here," he whispered to Zofia, pressing the registry certificate into her hands. "I'm going around to the back of the property. If I can reach the truck, I can get to the water company before they close. But Papa, if things get worse, show them the certificate. It might buy us time, but don't reveal it unless absolutely necessary." Before she could protest further, Alexander slipped away, circling wide through the trees to avoid being seen. His destination was Piotr's truck, which he could see parked behind the barn, hidden from the main yard. If he could borrow it, he might reach the regional office of Krynica Waters before they closed for the day. As he crept through the shadows, he heard Kroll's voice rising in anger. "This is ridiculous. Either control that animal or I'll have the officers deal with it." One of the police officers, a younger man with a kindly face, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, I'm not authorized to shoot a horse for simply running loose on its own property." "It's not his property anymore," Kroll snapped. "It's bank property now, and that horse is threatening bank representatives." The officer looked unconvinced. "The horse isn't threatening anyone, sir. He's just circling." Indeed, Berza continued his protective circling, maintaining distance but effectively preventing anyone from approaching the farmhouse or springs. The standoff had created exactly the delay Alexander needed. Reaching Piotr's truck, he silently thanked his neighbor for leaving the keys hidden above the visor, as was their local custom. The engine started with a reassuring rumble. Alexander backed out carefully, then accelerated down the rear access road that connected to the main highway, bypassing the confrontation entirely. As he drove, his mind raced faster than the vehicle. The regional office of Krynica Waters was 30 minutes away if he pushed the speed limit. They closed at 6, which gave him just enough time if traffic cooperated. But would Jakob still be there? Would he have the contract ready? And could he persuade him to return to the farm immediately to finalize everything? Meanwhile, back at the farm, Zofia watched the standoff from her hiding place, the certificate clutched tightly in her hand. She saw her father's escape in Piotr's truck and silently urged him to hurry. Berza continued his vigilant patrol, showing remarkable intelligence for an animal supposedly of limited value. The banker had managed to retrieve most of his scattered papers and was attempting to reassert control of the situation. "Officers, I must insist you proceed with the official notice of repossession. Whether Mr. Nowak is present or not, the bank's rights are clear." The older officer nodded reluctantly. "We'll post the notice on the door as required by law, but actual eviction requires additional legal steps. The residents have at least 24 hours to respond." This small victory, a day's reprieve, caused visible frustration on Kroll's face. "This is outrageous. I was assured the property would be secured today." "The law is the law, sir," the officer replied stiffly, clearly disliking being pressured. "Even for banks, and especially for horses," he added, with a glance at Berza, who continued his protective circling. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the disputed land, a tense calm settled over the farm. The notice was posted. The officials retreated to their vehicles, but no one left. Kroll stationed his men at the property entrance, clearly intending to monitor any developments through the night. Zofia remained hidden, watching and waiting, the precious certificate her only tangible hope. Somewhere on the darkening highway, her father raced against time, carrying their last chance for salvation. And in the yard, illuminated by the first light of the rising moon, Berza stood guard, the horse that a millionaire had mocked now standing as the final defender of their home. The headlights of Piotr's truck cut through the gathering darkness as Alexander pushed the aging vehicle to its limits. The speedometer needle trembled just past the 100 km/h mark, dangerously fast for the winding country roads, but necessity had overcome caution. Every minute counted in this race against the clock. A quick glance at the dashboard showed the time, 5:38 p.m. The regional office of Krynica Waters closed at 6 p.m. Even if he maintained this reckless pace, He would arrive with barely minutes to spare, assuming they didn't lock the doors early, assuming Jakub was still there, assuming the contract was ready. Too many assumptions, too many ways for this desperate plan to fail. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He thought of Zofia hiding in the woods with the precious certificate, of Piotr and the neighbors standing their ground, of Burza somehow understanding the gravity of the situation enough to intervene. All of them fighting to hold on just a little longer while he sped through the twilight toward their last hope. The lights of the small town where Krynica maintained its regional office finally appeared on the horizon. Alexander checked the time again. 5:52 p.m. 8 minutes. His heart pounded as he navigated the unfamiliar streets, searching for the address Jakub had provided. After one wrong turn that cost him precious seconds, he finally spotted the modern glass building with the company's blue logo illuminated above the entrance. The parking lot was nearly empty, a bad sign. Alexander pulled up directly in front of the main doors, not bothering with the designated spaces, and ran inside. The lobby was quiet, the reception desk unmanned. A cleaning woman looked up in surprise as he burst in. "The Krynica offices?" he asked breathlessly. "Are they still open?" She pointed toward an elevator. "4th floor, but they're closing now. You might not." Alexander was already moving, bypassing the elevator for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time despite the burning in his legs. He emerged on the 4th floor, slightly dizzy from the exertion, to find a set of glass doors with the Krynica logo etched into them. Through the glass, he could see lights still on, but no movement. Had he arrived too late? He pushed through the doors into a reception area where a young woman was just shutting down her computer. She looked up, startled by his sudden entrance. "I'm sorry, sir. We're closed for—" "Jakub Wilk," Alexander interrupted, struggling to catch his breath. "I need to see him immediately. It's urgent. About the Nowak Springs contract." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Wilk was expecting you earlier today. He waited as long as he could, but he had to leave for another appointment at 5:30. Alexander felt the floor tilt beneath him. Too late. After everything, he was too late. However, the receptionist continued, noting his distress. "He left instructions that if you arrived, you should be given this." She opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "He said it was very important and that you would understand what to do with it." With trembling hands, Alexander accepted the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Mr. Nowak, I anticipated possible delays given the situation with Kroll. The finalized contract is on this drive, ready for printing and signing. I've also emailed a copy to the bank with notification of our intent to proceed. If you need me to come in person, call my mobile number below at any hour." Jakub Wilk. Relief washed over Alexander in a dizzying wave. Jakub had foreseen the complications and prepared accordingly. All was not lost. "Can I use your computer?" he asked the receptionist. "I need to print this contract immediately." She hesitated, glancing at the clock. "We're technically closed." "Please," Alexander said, the single word carrying the weight of his family's entire future. "This is about saving my home." Something in his voice must have reached her, because she nodded and restarted her computer. "I'll help you." 20 minutes later, Alexander was back in Piotr's truck, a freshly printed contract secured in a folder beside him. He had called Jakub, who agreed to meet him at the farm in 1 hour. The drive back would be just as urgent as the journey in, but now he carried with him the power to confront Kroll and the bank on equal terms. As he drove, his mind turned to Zofia, alone in the darkened woods, and to Burza, whose unexpected intervention had created the distraction he needed to escape unnoticed. That horse, ridiculed and dismissed by Kroll, had proven itself more valuable than anyone could have imagined. First by leading them to the hidden spring, then by standing guard against those who would take their land. A twinge of guilt pricked at Alexander's conscience. In his haste, he had left both his daughter and the faithful animal to face Kroll's wrath. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Back at the farm, Twilight had deepened into full darkness. Zofia remained hidden among the trees, watching as the standoff continued. Kroll had stationed his men around the property, their flashlights sweeping across the yard at regular intervals. The police officers had departed after posting the repossession notice, but promised to return in the morning. The banker had retreated to his car, occasionally emerging to make phone calls that left him increasingly agitated. Pyotr and several neighbors maintained their vigil near the farmhouse, refusing to leave despite Kroll's threats. They had lit lanterns that cast pools of warm light around them, a small island of defiance in the growing darkness. Burza had finally settled, standing guard near the newly discovered spring, his silhouette visible in the moonlight. Every so often he would raise his head and neigh softly, as if calling for Alexander's return. Zofia's legs had grown numb from crouching for so long, but she dared not move from her hiding place. The certificate remained clutched in her hand, her final card to play if confronted. But her father had been right. Revealing it too soon might give Kroll the chance to fabricate some new obstacle. Better to wait for her father's return, hopefully with the water company contract in hand. A twig snapped behind her, and Zofia froze, hardly daring to breathe. A beam from a flashlight swept through the trees, coming perilously close to her position. One of Kroll's men was patrolling the perimeter, methodically searching the woods. She pressed herself against the trunk of a large oak, willing herself to become invisible in its shadow. The light moved closer, then paused, as if the searcher had heard something. Zofia closed her eyes, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The beam of light fell directly on her hiding place. "Hey!" a male voice called out. "There's someone in the trees!" Abandoning stealth for speed, Zofia sprang to her feet and ran deeper into the woods. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of Kroll's men and the crashing of pursuit through the underbrush. She knew these woods far better than they did, having played in them since childhood. But in the darkness, every shadow concealed potential obstacles. A root caught her foot, sending her sprawling painfully to the ground. The precious envelope flew from her grasp, landing somewhere in the darkness ahead. Zofia scrambled forward on hands and knees, desperately feeling through the leaves and twigs for the certificate. The voices and flashlights were drawing nearer. Her fingers touched paper. The envelope. She snatched it up and continued her flight, ignoring the stinging scrapes on her palms and knees. The trees began to thin, and suddenly she burst out of the woods onto the open field behind their barn. Exposed in the moonlight, she was momentarily disoriented. The farmhouse lay to her right, but running there would lead her directly into Kroll's men. To her left was the road, but it offered no shelter or hiding places. A soft nickering drew her attention. Burza had moved to the edge of the field as if aware of her predicament. Without hesitation, Zofia ran to the horse, whispering soothingly as she approached. Burza remained calm, lowering his head to her outstretched hand. "Good boy," she murmured, an idea forming rapidly. "We need to find Papa." In one fluid motion that surprised even herself, Zofia grabbed Burza's mane and swung herself onto his back. She had ridden occasionally as a child, before they had to sell their last horse years ago, but never bareback, and never in such desperate circumstances. Burza seemed to understand the urgency. Without prompting, he turned and began to trot away from the pursuing flashlights, heading toward the back road. Zofia leaned low over his neck, the certificate secured inside her jacket, as they accelerated into a smooth gallop. Behind her, she heard shouts of frustration as Kroll's men emerged from the woods to find their quarry escaping on horseback. One of them raised what looked like a radio to his mouth, no doubt alerting Kroll to this new development. Zofia guided Burza onto the back road, the same one her father had taken earlier. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching, a vehicle coming toward the farm. Was it her father returning, or more of Kroll's reinforcements? Burza maintained his powerful stride, eating up the distance between them and the approaching vehicle. As they drew closer, Zofia's hopes soared when she recognized Pyotr's familiar truck. She pulled gently on Burza's mane, bringing him to a halt in the middle of the road, directly in the path of the oncoming headlights. The truck slowed, then stopped. The driver's door opened, and Alexander emerged, his face a mixture of shock and relief at the sight of his daughter mounted on the horse that had been mocked as worthless. "Sophia, what happened? Are you all right?" She slid from Bursa's back, running to embrace her father. "Kroll's men were searching the woods. They almost caught me, but Bursa—" She stroked the horse's neck gratefully. "He helped me escape." Alexander placed a hand on Bursa's forehead, a gesture of profound gratitude. "It seems I owe you yet another debt, my friend." The horse nickered softly in response. "Did you get the contract?" Zofia asked urgently. Alexander nodded, patting the folder tucked under his arm. "Jakub is meeting us at the farm in 30 minutes. But from the look of things, we may need to adjust our plan." He glanced down the road toward their property, where flashlights were now moving in their direction. Kroll's men had figured out which way they had gone. "They're coming," Zofia said, her voice steady despite her fear. "And I still have the certificate." Alexander's mind worked rapidly, weighing their options. They could try to outrun Kroll's men, perhaps hide somewhere until Jakub arrived. But that would mean abandoning their home, leaving Piotr and the others to face Kroll's anger. Or they could confront Kroll directly, armed with both the contract and the certificate, and hope that the combined legal weight would force him to back down. "Get in the truck," he decided, opening the passenger door for Zofia. "We're going home." Bursa, as if understanding, turned and began trotting back toward the farm alongside the vehicle as Alexander slowly drove forward. The horse that a millionaire had mocked was now leading them back to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The truck's headlights illuminated the road ahead as Alexander drove toward the farm, Bursa trotting steadily alongside them. In the passenger seat, Zofia clutched both the certificate and the folder containing the contract, their paper weapons against Kroll's wealth and influence. The approaching flashlights of Kroll's men bobbed in the darkness, drawing closer with each passing second. "They'll try to stop us," Zofia said, tension evident in her voice. Alexander nodded grimly. "Let them try." He pressed the accelerator slightly, not enough to outpace Bursa, but enough to show their determination to proceed. The horse, seeming to sense the urgency, matched their increased speed effortlessly. As they neared the junction where the back road met their main driveway, two of Kroll's men stepped into the path of the truck, flashlights raised like weapons. Alexander slowed but didn't stop, forcing them to jump aside at the last moment. They shouted angrily, one of them speaking rapidly into a radio. "They're alerting Kroll," Zofia observed, watching in the side mirror as the men began running after them. "Good," Alexander replied. "I want him prepared. This ends tonight." They followed the curve of the driveway that led to the front of their property, Bursa now moving ahead as if leading the way. The scene that greeted them was one of tense confrontation. Piotr and the neighbors still holding their vigil near the farmhouse, Kroll and the banker engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion by their vehicles. The arrival of the truck with Bursa running ahead caused all heads to turn. Kroll's face, illuminated by the truck's headlights, registered first surprise, then cold fury. He stepped forward as Alexander parked and exited the vehicle, Zofia following close behind. "Nowak," Kroll called out, his voice carrying an edge of forced confidence. "Your dramatic return changes nothing. The repossession notice has been posted. This property legally belongs to the bank now." Alexander walked calmly toward him, aware of all eyes watching. His neighbors, Kroll's men, and the banker who stood uncertainly to one side. Bursa had positioned himself between Alexander and Kroll, his powerful presence adding weight to the farmer's approach. "That's not entirely accurate," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "The notice was posted prematurely, based on deliberately misleading information you provided to the bank." The banker stepped forward, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Mr. Nowak, the acceleration clause is quite clear. The unauthorized development—" "There was no unauthorized development," Alexander interrupted, nodding to Zofia, who produced the registry certificate from its envelope. "We were simply maintaining and restoring the natural springs that have always been part of this property." Springs that, according to this official certificate issued today, belong exclusively to the Nowak family, with all water rights included in perpetuity. The banker accepted the document with visible reluctance, scanning its contents while Kroll glared over his shoulder. Even in the dim light, the official seal of the registry office was unmistakable. "This appears to be in order, but it doesn't negate the acceleration clause," the banker insisted, though with noticeably less conviction. "The bank's position is about to change significantly," Alexander finished for him, taking the contract folder from Zofia. "Because the Nowak farm is no longer a struggling property on the brink of foreclosure. As of this evening, it is the exclusive supplier of premium spring water to Krynica Waters, under a 10-year contract with an advance payment that more than covers our outstanding loan." He handed the contract to the banker, who opened it with growing discomfort. Kroll's expression darkened as he peered at the document, his jaw clenching visibly. "This is a preliminary agreement at best," Kroll objected. "Unsigned, non-binding. Actually, it's fully binding upon my signature," a new voice announced. All heads turned to see Jakub Wilk walking up the driveway, briefcase in hand. He had arrived precisely when promised, his timing impeccable. "And I am fully authorized to execute this contract on behalf of Krynica Waters." Kroll's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. You can't possibly want to do business with this failing farm and its delusional owner who wastes money on crippled horses." At the mention of Burza, the horse raised his head proudly, as if aware he was being insulted. In the moonlight, his powerful form showed no trace of the injury that had once marked him as damaged goods. Restored to health through care and patience, he stood as living proof of Alexander's vision where others saw only waste. Jakub approached, stopping beside Alexander and Burza. "On the contrary, Mr. Kroll, the Nowak Springs produce some of the purest natural mineral water our company has tested in years. The investment is sound and the return will be exceptional." He glanced at Burza with an appreciative eye. "And I'd say Mr. Nowak's judgment regarding value has proven remarkably accurate." The banker cleared his throat, clearly reassessing his position as the balance of power shifted before his eyes. "If this contract is indeed valid, and the advance payment sufficient to clear the outstanding loan." He performed some quick calculations on his phone. The bank would naturally withdraw the repossession notice and consider the acceleration clause satisfied. "The contract is valid," Jakub confirmed, "and the advance payment will be processed immediately upon signing, which I am prepared to do right now." Kroll stepped closer to Alexander, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "This isn't over, Nowak. You think you've won, but I have investments throughout this region, friends in government, ways of making life very difficult for small farmers who cross me." Alexander met his gaze without flinching. "Perhaps. But tonight, you're going to watch me sign a contract that secures my family's future, on the land you tried to steal, beside the horse you mocked. Whatever comes after, I'll face it knowing that." Kroll's face contorted with rage, but he was interrupted by the sound of additional vehicles approaching. 2 more cars pulled into the driveway, and several people emerged, including the senior registrar from the land registry office. The elderly man approached Alexander with a nod of recognition. "Mr. Nowak, after you left today, I conducted some additional research on the claims made by Krollvest Holdings." He withdrew a folder from his briefcase. "I discovered concerning irregularities that suggested potential fraud in the filing. Given the urgency of the situation, I thought it best to bring this information directly to you and the relevant authorities." He gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward and presented identification, a government inspector from the Regional Anti-Corruption Bureau. Kroll's face drained of color as the inspector approached him. "Mr. Kroll, we'd like to ask you some questions regarding certain property transactions and claims filed by your companies. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private?" For the first time that evening, Kroll appeared genuinely shaken. His confident demeanor crumbled as he realized that his schemes had attracted attention far beyond this small rural dispute. The inspector led him toward one of the official vehicles, speaking in low tones about documentation and formal statements. As Kroll was escorted away, the banker hastily announced that the bank would be reviewing the situation overnight and would provide a formal withdrawal of the repossession notice in the morning. He gathered his papers and retreated to his car, eager to distance himself from the rapidly unraveling situation. In the sudden calm that followed their departure, Alexander found himself surrounded by neighbors offering congratulations and support. Pyotr clapped him on the back, his weathered face split by a wide grin. "I knew you'd find a way, Alexander." That Kroll never understood what he was up against. A true farmer never surrenders his land. Jakub approached with the contract, now spread on the hood of Pyotr's truck. "Shall we make it official, Mr. Nowak?" Under the light of lanterns held by neighbors and the soft glow of the rising moon, Alexander signed the document that would transform his struggling farm into a thriving enterprise. Jakub countersigned, then shook his hand firmly. "Congratulations. This is the beginning of a very profitable partnership for both of us." As the group moved toward the farmhouse, where Zofia was already preparing coffee to celebrate, Alexander hung back for a moment. He approached Bursa, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, and placed a gentle hand on the horse's neck. "You've proven your worth many times over," he murmured. "First by showing us the hidden spring, then by protecting our home when we were absent, and finally by helping Zofia escape. Kroll saw nothing but a lame horse, a bad investment. But I saw potential, just waiting for the right care to reveal itself." Bursa nickered softly, leaning his head against Alexander's shoulder in a gesture of equine affection. In that moment, as the stars shone overhead and the sounds of celebration drifted from the farmhouse, Alexander felt a profound sense of vindication. The gamble that had been mocked as foolishness had proven to be his salvation. "Come," he said to the horse, guiding him toward the stable where fresh hay and water awaited. "Tomorrow begins a new chapter for all of us." Behind them, the repossession notice hung forgotten on the farmhouse door, its threat now as empty as Kroll's promises. Tomorrow it would be taken down and replaced by something far more meaningful, a sign announcing the home of the Nowak Springs, source of the purest water in the region. Dawn broke over the Nowak farm with a golden brilliance that seemed to herald the new beginning. Alexander stood on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands as he surveyed his property with fresh eyes. The land that had been a burden of debt and worry just yesterday was now the foundation of his family's secure future. The morning dew sparkled on the grass around the springs, catching the light like scattered diamonds. Inside the house, Zofia hummed as she prepared breakfast, a sound Alexander hadn't heard in years. The weight of constant anxiety had lifted from her young shoulders, replaced by a buoyant optimism that transformed her entire demeanor. A vehicle approached up the driveway, not the sleek black car that had brought such threats, but the banker's more modest sedan. The man who emerged looked decidedly uncomfortable, clutching a leather portfolio and glancing around as if expecting an ambush. Alexander watched him approach, taking a deliberate sip of his coffee before acknowledging him. "Mr. Nowak," the banker began, his voice overly formal. "I've brought the official withdrawal of the repossession notice, as promised. The bank regrets any misunderstanding regarding the acceleration clause." Alexander accepted the document without comment, scanning its contents while the banker shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Additionally," the banker continued, "in light of your new contract with Krynica Waters, the bank would be pleased to offer you a flexible line of credit for any improvements or expansions you might be considering for your operation." The irony wasn't lost on Alexander. Yesterday they had been eager to seize his land. Today they were offering to lend him more money. "I'll consider it," he replied neutrally, "though I suspect Krynica might have their own financing options." The banker nodded quickly. Of course. Just know that the bank values your business and looks forward to a positive relationship moving forward." With a final awkward nod, he retreated to his car, visibly relieved to have completed this uncomfortable duty. As the banker's car disappeared down the driveway, Pyotr arrived in his truck, accompanied by several of the neighbors who had stood with them the previous night. They spilled out, carrying tools and supplies, ready to continue the work they had started. "We thought you might need some help preparing the springs properly," Piotr explained, clapping Alexander on the shoulder. "Now that you're going to be a proper water tycoon, you'll need proper infrastructure." Alexander smiled, touched by their continued solidarity. "I'm hardly a tycoon yet, but the help is welcome. Jakub is sending engineers next week to plan the extraction system, but there's plenty to do before then." Together they set to work clearing and expanding the areas around all 3 springs, building proper containment basins and improving the drainage systems. The work was hard but carried a sense of purpose and promise that transformed it from burden to opportunity. Even those neighbors who had initially kept their distance, uncertain of Alexander's gamble with Bursa, now appeared with offers of assistance or gifts of food for the workers. Mid-morning brought another visitor, Marek, the horse trader who had sold Bursa to Alexander. The old man rode up on a dappled mare, his leathery face creased in a broad smile as he took in the busy scene. "Well, well," he called out, dismounting with a grunt. "Looks like your gamble paid off after all, Alexander. News travels fast. They're saying all over the county that you outmaneuvered that city shark Kroll and struck it rich with your springs." Alexander wiped sweat from his brow, extending a hand to the old trader. "Not exactly rich, but we'll keep the farm. Thanks in no small part to Bursa. Your instincts about that horse were right." Marek's eyes twinkled. "I had a feeling you two would be good for each other. Speaking of which, where is the champion?" As if summoned by the question, Bursa trotted into view from behind the barn, his stride powerful and even, with no trace of his former lameness. The horse approached Marek cautiously, sniffing at his outstretched hand before allowing the old man to stroke his neck. "Magnificent," Marek murmured, running a practiced eye over the animal. "His recovery is remarkable. You must have the touch, Alexander. Just patience and care, that's all. The potential was always there." Marek nodded thoughtfully. "That's the secret most people never learn, seeing potential where others see only flaws." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in oilcloth. "I brought something for him. A special blend of herbs and minerals I've developed over the years. Strengthens bones and tendons. He may not need it anymore, but it can't hurt." Alexander accepted the gift gratefully. "You didn't have to do that." "Consider it my investment in your new enterprise," Marek replied with a wink. "Now that you're a businessman, you'll understand the value of building goodwill." After Marek departed, promising to return with potential buyers for Bursa's future offspring, Jakub arrived with several colleagues from Krynica Waters. They carried sophisticated testing equipment and surveying tools, moving with the efficiency of professionals eager to begin a promising project. "We couldn't wait until next week," Jakub explained, his enthusiasm evident. "The laboratory processed the additional samples overnight, and the results exceeded even our initial findings. The management team authorized immediate commencement of development plans. While the Krynica team conducted their surveys and tests, Alexander led Jakub on a tour of the improvements they had already begun. The water company representative nodded approvingly at their initiative. "This partnership will benefit both of us tremendously," Jakub said, as they stood beside the main spring, watching its crystal-clear water bubble forth from the earth. "Our preliminary marketing studies suggest that Nowak Springs has an authentic appeal that resonates with consumers seeking natural, artisanal products." "Artisanal?" Alexander repeated, finding the term strangely amusing when applied to water that had flowed freely for generations without human intervention. Jakub smiled. "The market values stories as much as substance, Mr. Nowak, and your story, the struggling farmer who recognized value where others saw only burden, who fought against a powerful adversary to protect his heritage, that's marketing gold." The idea of his family's struggle being transformed into a selling point for bottled water felt somewhat uncomfortable to Alexander, but he recognized the practical wisdom in Jakub's assessment. If his story helped sell their water, benefiting both his family and the community that had stood by them, perhaps that was a fair exchange. By late afternoon, the Krynica team had completed their initial assessment and were preparing to leave. Jakub presented Alexander with preliminary drawings of the modest bottling facility they proposed to build on a corner of his property. a simple, environmentally conscious structure designed to blend with the rural landscape while housing the necessary equipment for extraction, purification, and packaging. Construction could begin within a month once the permits are approved, Jakub explained, and the advance payment should appear in your account by tomorrow morning, as agreed. After they departed, Alexander found himself momentarily alone for the first time all day. The neighbors had gone home for dinner, promising to return the next day. Zofia was inside, speaking excitedly on the phone with a friend about their sudden change in fortune. Even Berza had wandered to the far pasture, grazing contentedly in the golden light of the setting sun. Alexander walked slowly around his property, trying to absorb the dramatic transformation that had occurred in just 24 hours. Yesterday, he had been a desperate man on the verge of losing everything. Today, he was a business owner with a lucrative contract, financial security, and newfound respect from neighbors who had previously regarded his struggles with pity or indifference. His wandering brought him to the stable where he had first housed Berza. The horse's stall was empty now. With his recovery complete, Berza preferred the freedom of the pasture, but evidence of his presence remained. A few hairs from his mane caught on a rough board, hoof prints in the packed earth floor, the scent of hay and horse that permeated the timbers. Alexander ran his hand along the stall door, remembering the moment when Kroll and his associates had stood here, mocking his decision to purchase an injured horse rather than accept their predatory offer. Their laughter had stung his pride, but it had also strengthened his resolve. In a strange way, he almost felt grateful for their derision. It had fueled his determination to prove them wrong. From the pasture came the sound of Berza's neigh, as if the horse sensed Alexander's reflections and was offering his own comment. Alexander smiled, stepping out of the stable to see the stallion silhouetted against the sunset, head raised proudly, the very picture of equine nobility. No one seeing him now would ever guess that he had once been dismissed as worthless. "We proved them wrong, didn't we, boy?" Alexander called softly. As darkness settled over the farm, bringing with it a profound sense of peace, Alexander made his way back to the house where warm light spilled from the windows and the smell of cooking promised a hearty meal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, contracts to review, plans to approve, decisions about how best to steward their unexpected good fortune. But tonight was for gratitude, for appreciating the quiet victory of having preserved what mattered most. At the doorway, he paused for one last look at his land, at the springs that had always been there, waiting to be recognized for their true value. Like Berza, they had needed only someone who could see beyond surface appearances to the potential that lay beneath. 3 months passed with astonishing speed, each day bringing new developments to the Nowak farm. The modest bottling facility that Jakub had proposed was now a reality, a low, elegant building of glass and natural stone that nestled against the hillside as if it had grown there. Inside, state-of-the-art equipment hummed efficiently, drawing water from the springs, filtering it minimally to preserve its natural mineral content, and packaging it in sleek glass bottles bearing the Nowak Springs label. The first production run had rolled off the line just 2 weeks ago, and already orders were exceeding projections. Restaurants in Warsaw and Krakow were featuring the water on their menus, praising its exceptional purity and flavor. A glossy lifestyle magazine had even published a feature about the miraculous waters from the farm that refused to die, complete with artful photographs of Alexander standing beside Berza at the main spring. The farm itself had undergone a transformation almost as dramatic as its financial situation. The house, once showing signs of neglect from years of deferred maintenance, now stood freshly painted with a new roof and repaired stonework. The barn had been restored, the fences rebuilt, and the roads re-graveled. Yet Alexander had been careful to maintain the property's authentic character, resisting suggestions for more radical modernization. This wasn't just a business site, it was still his home, his heritage. On this particular autumn morning, Alexander walked the perimeter of his land with Berza at his side, a daily ritual that allowed him to appreciate how far they had come. The horse, now in peak condition, matched his pace with dignified patience, occasionally stopping to graze on the lush grass that had sprouted after recent rains. They paused at the eastern boundary, where workers were constructing a new stable, larger and more modern than the old one, designed specifically for breeding operations. This was Alexander's personal project, separate from the water business. With Burza's injury fully healed and his extraordinary qualities now evident, several horse breeders had approached with offers to purchase stud services. After consulting with Marek, Alexander had decided to establish a small but select breeding program, focusing on horses with Burza's intelligence and resilience. "What do you think?" he asked the stallion, who surveyed the construction with pricked ears. "It's going to be your legacy, as much as the springs are mine." From behind them came the sound of an approaching vehicle, a sleek company car bearing the Krynica Waters logo. Jakub had become a regular visitor, overseeing the operation with a personal interest that went beyond corporate oversight. He emerged from the car with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, his face animated with excitement. "Good news, Mr. Nowak," he called as he approached. "The first market feedback reports are in, and they're exceptional. Customer response is overwhelmingly positive, especially to the premium line." The premium line had been Jakub's inspiration, a limited edition of Burza Reserve, sourced exclusively from the spring that the horse had discovered, packaged in cobalt blue glass bottles with a silhouette of the stallion on the label. Priced at 3 times the standard water, it had initially seemed an extravagance, but the exclusive hotels and restaurants of Europe had embraced it enthusiastically. "That's excellent," Alexander replied, genuinely pleased, but still sometimes bemused by the fuss over what was, essentially, just clean water from his land. "Though I still find it strange that people will pay so much for water." Jakub smiled, accustomed to Alexander's pragmatic perspective. "They're not just paying for water, Mr. Nowak. They're paying for purity, for the story, for the connection to something authentic in a world of artificial products." He patted Burza's neck affectionately. "And they're paying tribute to this fellow's remarkable instincts." Alexander nodded, understanding the truth in Jakub's words, even if the marketing language sometimes felt foreign to his straightforward nature. "Well, as long as they keep buying, I'm content." They walked together toward the bottling facility, discussing production schedules and distribution plans. 3 local residents had been hired to operate the equipment, with more jobs promised as operations expanded. This employment opportunity was one of the aspects of the venture that pleased Alexander most, the chance to bring prosperity not just to his family, but to his community. As they neared the facility, Alexander spotted a familiar truck parked nearby, Piotr's old pickup. His neighbor had become the unofficial liaison between the farm and the surrounding community, keeping Alexander informed of local developments while representing the interests of area residents to the increasingly busy water operation. Piotr stood waiting for them, his weathered face split by an unusually broad grin. "You're not going to believe this," he announced without preamble. "Kroll's being indicted. The Anti-Corruption Bureau found evidence of land fraud going back years. Falsified documents, bribes to local officials, the works. It's all over the regional news." Alexander absorbed this information with mixed emotions. While he felt a certain vindication in Kroll's downfall, he had moved beyond the desire for revenge. His focus now was on building, not settling scores. "What happens to all the land he acquired?" he asked, thinking of the neighboring farms that had succumbed to Kroll's pressure tactics. "That's the best part," Piotr replied. "The courts are likely to void the transactions where fraud can be proven. Some of our neighbors might get their land back." This was genuinely good news. Alexander had worried about the families displaced by Kroll's schemes, many of whom had deep generational ties to their land similar to his own. "There's more," Piotr continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, despite the fact that only Jakub stood nearby. "Word is that Kroll was searching for something specific when he started buying up land in this region. Not just water, but something potentially more valuable." Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What kind of something?" "Lithium deposits," Piotr revealed. Apparently, geological surveys suggested this area might have commercially viable concentrations. Kroll was trying to secure mining rights before anyone else realized what was at stake. Jakub let out a low whistle. Lithium is essential for batteries, electric cars, phones, everything. With the push toward renewable energy, it's becoming increasingly valuable. Are you saying there might be lithium under our feet right now? Alexander asked, looking down at the ground with new awareness. Pyotr shrugged. The surveys were preliminary. It would take extensive testing to know for sure, but it might explain why Kroll was so determined to get your land in particular. Alexander fell silent, contemplating this revelation. The springs alone had transformed his family's fortunes, but if lithium deposits were confirmed as well, the implications were staggering. Sensing his distraction, Jakub excused himself to check on operations inside the facility, leaving Alexander and Pyotr alone with Burza, who had wandered a few paces away to investigate a clump of particularly appealing grass. "What would you do?" Alexander asked his friend quietly. "If it turned out there was lithium here, would you mine it?" Pyotr considered the question with appropriate gravity. "That's a complicated decision. Mining brings jobs, wealth, but also disruption, potential environmental concerns." He gestured toward the bottling facility with its tasteful design and minimal footprint. "What you've built here honors the land while using its resources. Could mining do the same?" "I don't know." Alexander nodded, appreciating his friend's honesty. The question wasn't merely hypothetical. If lithium was confirmed, he would eventually need to make that choice. For now, though, he was content to focus on the blessings already realized. "One miracle at a time," he said, watching as Zofia emerged from the house and made her way toward them. His daughter had blossomed in these past months. The weight of uncertainty lifted from her young shoulders. She had started talking about university again, a dream that had seemed impossibly distant during their financial struggles. "Papa," she called, waving a letter. "The agricultural college responded to my application. I've been accepted for the spring semester." Pride swelled in Alexander's chest as he embraced his daughter, the letter clutched triumphantly in her hand. This was what truly mattered, not the money from the springs or the potential wealth from minerals beneath their feet, but the opportunities now available to his child, the future secured for the next generation. As they walked back to the house together, Burza following at a leisurely pace, Alexander found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led them here. If someone had told him 4 months ago that purchasing an injured horse would lead to discovering valuable springs, defeating a powerful enemy, and potentially uncovering mineral wealth, he would have dismissed them as delusional. Yet here they were, living that very reality. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the land that had been in his family for generations and would now continue in their care for generations to come. All because he had seen value where others saw only liability, potential where others saw only brokenness. Kroll's mocking laughter now seemed very distant indeed. 1 year to the day after Alexander had purchased Bursa, the Nowak farm hosted a celebration. The weather cooperated magnificently, providing sunshine and gentle breezes that carried the scent of autumn across the property. Tables had been set up in the meadow beside the main spring, laden with food and drink prepared by families from throughout the region. Children ran laughing between the tables, their faces bright with the simple joy of festivity. Alexander stood slightly apart, watching the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The past year had exceeded his wildest expectations. The water business had flourished, with Nowak Springs now appearing in shops and restaurants across Europe. The breeding program was in its early stages, but showing promise. Burza's first foals would arrive in the spring, and advance interest in them was strong. Most importantly, Zofia had completed her first semester at the agricultural college with outstanding marks, her future now limited only by her ambitions rather than by financial constraints. "Quite a change from last year," Pyotr remarked, appearing at Alexander's side with 2 glasses of locally brewed beer. He handed one to his friend, raising the other in silent toast. Alexander nodded, accepting the drink gratefully. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find it was all a dream, that we're still struggling, still facing foreclosure." "No dream," Pyotr assured him, gesturing toward the thriving operation around them. "Just the rewards of courage and vision, not everyone would have seen what you saw in that horse. As if summoned by their conversation, Burza appeared at the edge of the meadow. No longer confined to a paddock, the stallion now had free run of the property, yet chose to remain close to the human activity, particularly when Alexander was present. The horse made his way through the crowd, who parted respectfully to allow his passage, many reaching out to pat his gleaming coat as he passed. Children gazed at him with undisguised admiration, whispering that this was the famous horse from the water bottle label. Burza approached Alexander with unhurried dignity, coming to stand beside him with the comfortable familiarity of a trusted companion. Alexander stroked the horse's neck, marveling still at the transformation from the injured animal he had first brought home. Burza's coat shone with health, his muscles rippled with strength, and his eyes reflected an intelligence that sometimes seemed almost human. "The guest of honor arrives," Alexander said with a smile. "This celebration is as much for you as for anyone, my friend." Jakub joined them, resplendent in a suit that managed to be both casual and elegant. The water company representative had become something of a friend over the past year, his initial business interest in the springs evolving into genuine respect for Alexander and affection for the farm. "Your new advertisement is being released today," Jakub announced proudly. "It's running in major publications across Europe. The marketing team is confident it will significantly boost our premium line sales." He handed Alexander a glossy magazine open to a full-page spread. The advertisement featured a striking photograph of Burza standing beside the main spring, his powerful form silhouetted against a sunrise that transformed ordinary water droplets into golden jewels. Above the image, elegant typography proclaimed, "Some see only what is broken. Others see what could be. Nowak Springs. Vision in every drop." The text below told a simplified version of their story. The struggling farmer who invested his last money in an injured horse that everyone mocked, only to have that horse lead him to the springs that saved his farm. It was artfully done, transforming their hard-fought battle into an inspiring parable of faith and perseverance. "It's beautiful," Alexander admitted, genuinely impressed by how the marketing team had captured the essence of their journey without exploiting it. "Though it makes me sound wiser than I felt at the time. The best stories reveal truths we don't always recognize in ourselves," Jakub replied philosophically. "You saw potential where others saw only liability. That is wisdom, whether you recognized it or not." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black car. Not Kroll's this time, but one belonging to his former attorney. The lawyer, a thin man with nervous eyes, approached Alexander with visible discomfort. "Mr. Nowak, I apologize for intruding on your celebration," he began, glancing around at the curious onlookers. "I come on behalf of Mr. Kroll, who, as you may know, is currently unable to travel due to the conditions of his bail." Alexander nodded, his expression neutral. He had followed the news of Kroll's legal troubles with detached interest, neither celebrating nor lamenting the man's downfall. "What does he want?" The lawyer extracted an envelope from his jacket. "He asked me to deliver this to you personally. I don't know its contents." Alexander accepted the envelope cautiously. It was heavyweight stationery, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned manner that seemed characteristic of Kroll's flair for drama. Breaking the seal, he removed a single sheet of paper covered in flowing handwriting. The letter was brief and direct. Kroll acknowledged his defeat, admitted his attempts to fraudulently acquire the Nowak property, and formally retracted any remaining claims or legal challenges to the land and water rights. More surprisingly, he expressed a begrudging respect for Alexander's tenacity and vision. The final paragraph contained an unexpected offer, a substantial sum to purchase Burza for his private stable, now that the horse's value has been so dramatically proven. Alexander read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and returned it to the envelope. "Please tell Mr. Kroll that I appreciate his acknowledgement regarding the property rights. As for his offer to purchase Burza," he glanced at the horse standing proudly beside him, "some things are not for sale at any price." The lawyer nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the response. "I will convey your message." With a small bow, he retreated to his car and departed, leaving a brief ripple of speculation in his wake. "What did he want?" Zofia asked, joining her father as the celebration resumed its festive rhythm. Alexander smiled, placing an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "To buy what can't be bought, to own what can only be earned." He nodded toward Burza. He still doesn't understand the difference between price and value. As the afternoon progressed, neighbors and friends took turns sharing stories of the past year's transformation, how the Nowak farm's success had revitalized the entire community, providing jobs and hope where despair had begun to take root. Several families who had sold their land to Kroll under duress spoke of the court proceedings that might soon restore their properties, thanks in part to evidence Alexander had helped provide to the anti-corruption investigators. When the time came for Alexander to speak, he found himself momentarily overcome with emotion. Standing before his friends and neighbors, with Zofia at his side and Burza nearby, he was struck by the profound journey they had traveled together. "A year ago," he began when he had collected himself, "I stood in this same spot with no hope and no future. The bank was about to take everything, and I had just spent money we couldn't spare on a horse everyone said was worthless." He gestured toward Burza, who raised his head as if acknowledging the reference. "I was mocked for that decision, called a fool, a dreamer, a man who couldn't recognize reality." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, many of whom had witnessed Kroll's derision firsthand. "But what I've learned," Alexander continued, "is that reality isn't always what others tell us it is. Sometimes it's hidden beneath the surface, like our springs. Sometimes it's masked by temporary setbacks, like Burza's injury. The true value of things, and people, often lies beyond what's immediately visible." He raised his glass in a toast that encompassed everyone present. "To seeing beneath the surface, to recognizing worth where others see only cost, and to the companions who walk beside us, whether on 2 legs or 4, making the journey worthwhile." As the gathering lifted their glasses in response, Burza moved forward to stand directly beside Alexander, their shadows merging in the late afternoon sun. Man and horse, once the subjects of a millionaire's mockery, now symbols of a success that transcended mere financial measures. Later, as twilight settled over the farm and the last guests departed, Alexander walked with Burza to the highest point on his property. From this vantage, they could see the entire operation: the springs, the bottling facility, the new stable nearing completion, and the farmhouse where lights now glowed warmly in every window. "We did it, old friend," Alexander said softly, resting his hand on Burza's withers. "We showed them all." The horse nickered gently in response, nudging Alexander's shoulder in what had become their familiar gesture of mutual respect and affection. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Alexander felt a profound sense of completion. The desperate gamble that had been mocked so ruthlessly had transformed into the cornerstone of a new legacy. The journey had taught him that true wealth lay not in money or possessions, but in the ability to see potential where others saw only limitation, to recognize value where others calculated only cost. Burza's story, their story, would continue to inspire others through the simple image on a water bottle, a reminder that sometimes the most miraculous transformations begin with an act of faith that defies conventional wisdom. And perhaps somewhere, a struggling farmer would look at that image and find the courage to make their own seemingly foolish choice, to follow their own vision despite the mockery of those who lacked the wisdom to see beneath the surface. In the quiet of that autumn evening, with his faithful horse beside him and his land secure beneath his feet, Alexander Nowak knew with absolute certainty that some victories transcended all expectations, rendering the laughter of millionaires utterly speechless in the end.